So in closing, let me see what I'm doing by way of time. Yeah, well, I'm not quite closing, but as we're winding down Van Kampen, we're going to now look at these 7 significant parallels that we've been looking at between the Antiochus Epiphanes man and the future Antichrist. These parallels that should catch our attention as we look at the book of Daniel, look at history's Antichrists that have come and gone, with a view towards this coming heinous ruler who's going to once again seek to destroy God's people and destroy God's very name, wipe it away from the face of earth, and establish its own self-rule. Let's look at these parallels that Van Kampen himself has noticed. And most of them you've probably heard. Many of them, maybe some of them are new. Let's watch. Let's read. The following 7 similarities or parallels of Antiochus and Antichrist are the most significant and should be watched for as the sequence of events begins to unfold in the last days. Let's just read down through these, and I'll try and read through them first without stopping so we can make some progress. First, and these are in no particular order, but first, under the guise of friendship and the promise of protection, both men make covenants with the nation of Israel. I might pause and interject that Antiochus himself sought to make agreements with the priesthood and prominent rulers of Israel that day. We know that there was corruption in Israel, and there were many people who were willing to side with Antiochus in order to gain whatever peace or profit that was to be gained from making a deal with the devil. Right? The same thing's going to happen when when Antichrist hits the scene. He's going to make an accord agreement with Israel. But this time, the book of Revelation, as well as Daniel, predicts that it will be a 7-year agreement. Oddly enough, as I interject, the Islamic Antichrist that we're going to be looking at in the near future here, within the next few weeks, within 2 or 3 weeks down the road with Joel Richardson, the Islamic prophecies and scriptures actually foretell of a coming religious ruler in their prophetic writings that speak of a 7-year peace treaty that is established as well. Isn't that interesting? We'll get to that in time. All right, so second, Van Kampen reminds us, as in the days of Antiochus, many in Israel will again yield to this diabolical servant of Satan after the signing of the covenant, again seeking to gain the favor of this powerful world leader. You're always going to have people who are going to trade land for peace in the Middle East, right? That's always been a determining factor of who should we agree with? Whose side should we take? The people over there are desperate for peace, yes, but they're desperate for land. And so it's not going to be any surprise that many Israelis and people in prominent leadership positions in the Middle East are going to yield to the Antichrist's covenantal agreement to have a measured amount of peace amongst themselves in trade for X amount of favors from the Antichrist. He'll be in control. He obviously is not going to be able to levy out those types of favors unless he has that power and he has that wealth and he has those resources at his disposal. So he will be a prominent figure at that time and probably will make headlines when the time comes, and we can be looking at that. Third, Van Kampen mentions, after making their treaties with Israel, while Israel lives under a false sense of security, both men seek to conquer Egypt and then return to ravage Israel and desecrate her temple. Remember, for the longest time, I've been talking about this now and not yet, prophetic, telescoping, near, far aspects of Daniel's prophecies that started way back in chapter 7, and don't finish till you get to the end of Daniel. So 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Read all of that together one of these days and notice how that the prophecies that God gave to Daniel through these dreams, these 4 prominent visions and dreams that include Nebuchadnezzar's statue in chapter 2, Daniel's dream in chapter 7, then the ram and the goat in chapter 8, and then finally culminating in the little horn and the Antichrist in chapters 11 and 12. What we have in these visions of Daniel, the 4 visions, are a look at the end time events as seen through the lens of the forerunner Antiochus, and then the final fulfillment of Antichrist himself. And so what's important, as we're noticing, is that the near far aspect is in view. When you're reading through the prophecies, you're not always certain, are these words talking about Antiochus, which was future to Daniel, right? A couple hundred years future in Daniel's day, like what, 400 years, I believe? Or are they Antichrist, which was like now 2,000 years since or more since Daniel, right? Which one was it? And the answer to your question is, it's now and not yet. It's near and far. It's a little bit of Antichrist and a little bit of Antiochus and a little bit of Antichrist. So it's both men in view, but you have to kind of watch for where certain details kind of leap off the page that say, well, this has to be Antichrist, or this could be Antiochus in partial, but Antichrist in total. So how much of overlap there will be, we'll have to wait and see. But Van Kampen is just kind of highlighting some of the places where there's obvious overlap, where because of the benefit of history past, we can now look at Antiochus and go, okay, that already happened. We read through the book of Daniel, we look at our history book, and we go, there are parts of history of Daniel now that already took place partially, but might just turn around and happen again verbatim. I mean, honestly, almost all of Daniel's prophecy, starting in chapter 7 and working our way to chapter 12, almost all of it could really come to pass again with the Antichrist, including bringing back the 4 of the 7 beasts that that are mentioned in the book of Revelation, right? Going back in Daniel's day to Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome. Those 4, we're skipping the first 2, Egypt and Assyria, which show up in John's Revelation. But in Daniel, we had, starting with the beasts in Daniel, was Babylon was the first one mentioned in Daniel, because that was the one most relevant to his day, because he was living in the time of exile from Babylon. So Babylon, then Medo-Persia, then Greece, then Rome, or Rome / maybe the Ottomans, right? If you're going to follow the Islamic model. But the point being is that when we look at the prophecies of Daniel, it's entirely possible and probable that there will be a revival of those 4 of Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome when the time of Antichrist comes. You're thinking, what, Ariel? How could that happen? How could Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome revive? Well, number one, those land masses didn't disappear. Those places in the Middle East geographically, Iraq and Iran and Syria and Turkey and those places in Upper Egypt and stuff, and modern day parts of Greece, right? Obviously, Europe is where Rome existed in the past. These places, landmass, they still exist. Of course, we can have a revival of those kingdoms, but maybe not to the power that they once had. They won't be world powers again, but we can certainly have a revival of some authoritative structure and leadership from within those geographical areas, so much so that it registers in the prophecies as those nations. So the stone that strikes the statue at the feet at the 10 toes area is said to wipe out all of those metals at once. Go back and read Daniel's prophecy in Daniel chapter 7 again. So what that means is that if they're wiped out all at once, going all the way back to Egypt, which does still exist today, right? If it goes all the way back to Assyria, is just Syria. They just add another letter to their name in other countries. Assyria becomes Syria. But all of those 7 beast empires are basically going to be in existence when Antichrist hits the scene. So some way. Let's keep reading. Let me look at my time here. We're doing good. We got about 10 minutes left. Let's keep reading. We might even make it through all 7 of these parallels. Van Kampen says, 4th, both men proclaim themselves to be gods and demand worship from their subjects, and those Jews who refuse become the primary target of their wrath. Now remember, there's 2 primary models for Antichrist figures in the future. One of the models is what we might call a European Antichrist, where the Antichrist rises up out of maybe a European unit, a revived Roman Empire, and so he comes from European ancestry and brings that kind of perspective to the table of discussion on end-time events. Of course, he still ends up brokering a peace with Israel and turning on Israel in the midpoint and persecuting her and Christians, etc., etc. But he rises out of maybe European ancestry, maybe German ancestry, etc., etc. That's one model. Another prominent model that we're going to be looking at in time, as I keep whetting your appetite towards this, is an Islamic Antichrist model where the Antichrist is raised up not out of European stock, but comes instead from ancient, either Iranian or Syrian or some type of Arabic stock, Muslim stock, some background there. And in that view, he's still going to persecute Jews, but a primary difference is that perhaps earlier on, Islam is not going to be under his gun when it comes time to declare himself to be God over all gods. Are you guys kind of understanding what I'm saying? In the first model, with a European Antichrist, he has every good reason to, at the midpoint of the week, declare himself to be God, sit in the temple, declare himself to be God, and oppose every god or so-called God, an object of worship, like Paul says in 2 Thessalonians. And in so doing, he's going to obviously oppose Judaism, Christianity, and in the European model version of Antichrist, I can see him even opposing Islam, because he's going to declare his own version of one world religion, and everyone's going to have to yield to that. We don't know exactly what that might look like, but in the European model, it might resemble a form of ecumenical type of, a conflating of all the religions together, mixing them together, a kind of washing them all together, mixing them together, kind of like a melting pot, as it were, and smoothing them all out and saying that they're all owe their allegiance to him. That's one version. But in the Islamic Antichrist model, I could easily see him declaring that Israel and Judaism and Christianity and all other forms of religion, you've got to get out of the picture, you've got to go away, and only Islam is the only allowable religion. I can see him going in that direction. So we're talking about who's going to be the primary target of his wrath in the day. Well, it kind of depends on which model of Antichrist you go with. All right. Van Kampen says, let's see what I'm doing by time. Doing great. 5 minutes. Fifth, both tyrants have to contend with these groups of Jews who refuse to worship or serve them, and who foment considerable dissension and opposition from the rural areas surrounding the city of Jerusalem when they learn of the despot's true character and intentions regarding Israel, right? So just like in the day of Antiochus, when Antichrist hits the scene, not everybody's going to just bend over backwards for him. There are obviously going to be people who oppose him, both there in the Middle East as well as worldwide, who aren't going to yield to his one world religion and government and politics and policies and everything. Of course, he's going to go say, off with your head if you don't do what I say, but there are a lot of people who would rather die than serve the Antichrist. When he goes and declares himself to be God, there are a good number of religious people worldwide, Jews, Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, Catholics, you name it, and many different religions. They're going to say, no, we don't recognize you as our religious leader. We will continue to worship our God and our religion, and if you have to kill us for it, oh well, so be it. But we also know that there's going to be a group of people who are going to not just say we won't bow, but they're going to fight back. And that'll be primarily starting in Israel and Jerusalem and the surrounding areas, just like the Maccabees, went through. What did they do? They conducted these kind of guerrilla warfare campaigns against Antiochus back in the day, and eventually they won, right? Praise God. All right, let's wind things down with the sixth here. Van Kampen says, sixth, following the defeat of Antiochus and the cleansing of the temple that had been defiled by him, the nation of Israel initiated the feast of Hanukkah, or Hanukkah, the festival of lights, or of dedication. And those of you who've attended any Messianic congregation or participated in a Hanukkah celebration, you guys know exactly what we're talking about. Why do we celebrate Hanukkah? Because we had to rededicate the temple, because Antiochus Epiphanes desecrated it, and God fought back and fought for his people and eventually won the victory for his own name. And thus we now celebrate not just the rededication of the temple, but the return to our way of worship as we understand it, that God has dictated for us as Jewish people and as Christians. In closing, Van Kampen reminds us, this festival commemorates Israel's deliverance from that ungodly tyrant, Antiochus, and celebrates the restoration of the temple and the purification of its altar. So even if you're not Christian today, in closing, I invite you to investigate Hanukkah. Find out what it's all about. You just might find yourself becoming involved in events that are similar to what took place during Hanukkah in these last days when Antichrist hits the scene and causes even an even greater Hanukkah to have to take place. Because we've read into the story, and I'll close with this. Let me read this last line from Van Kampen, and then I'll draw our study to a close. Van Kampen reminds us, it also looks forward to, that is Hanukkah, looks forward to the eventual return of God's glory to the temple. So what we've learned tonight in closing and summary is that there are these parallels between Antiochus Epiphanes, the forerunner of Antichrist, and Antichrist himself. And this entire study at this perspective is a look through the lens of the historical man known as Antiochus Epiphanes and how he ravaged Israel and tried to force the subjugation of Israel as a people group and tried to destroy the Jewish religion and the Torah way of life and to desecrate God's temple. And he robbed the temple and he just left it in shambles. And he tried to really destroy the Jewish people there, but God intervened. And so the lessons that we're learning as I'm drawing our study to a close with, and we'll stop at parallel number 6. We'll pick this up next week, right in the middle with a kind of a cliffhanger, and pick up with number 7 next week. What we're learning is that as bad as it's going to get when Antichrist hits the scene, if you've read it in the book and you have hope, and your hope is anchored in the true Christ, not the Antichrist, not the false Christ, not the fake one, but the genuine, the true Christ, Yeshua the Messiah, then his Holy Spirit has prepared you for these tribulational times that are going to befall planet Earth someday soon. And so you can be rest assured that even if you lose your life, even if you're one of the martyred, you can be assured that someday God will rescue his people. And if you've read the end of the book, particularly Revelation, even the end of parts of Daniel, then you'll realize, like for instance, Daniel chapter 11 and chapter 12, then you realize that ultimately God is going to fight for his people. You can read Zechariah chapter 12, 13, and 14, and see the picture that one day God will send his son Messiah to plant his feet on the Mount of Olives, split that mountain in half, and he's going to fight for his people, not just Israel in that day, but he's going to fight for the church as well. And so ultimately, Yeshua, our true Messiah, he's going to usher in his 1,000-year kingdom of righteousness here on planet Earth. And guess what's going to happen to the Antichrist? Don't mean to spoil it for you, but, spoiler alert, the Antichrist, he goes bye-bye, right? He gets destroyed. Or he gets thrown alive into the lake of fire, and we have to reconcile those two passages. Is he destroyed? Is he thrown alive into the lake of fire? The point is, he gets taken out of the scene, right? He gets taken out of the way, and God will have his day. So we're going to close with that tonight. We'll pick this up next week and see if we can finish Van Kampen's notes, and that'll park us right back in front of, as I mentioned at the beginning of this study an hour ago, Topic 7 that we're going to get to is Excursus, the Islamic Antichrist, per Joel Richardson. You don't want to miss that study. It's going to be quite fascinating. But that'll do it for Eschatology, a biblical study of end time events.